In any case, I'll be very, very short. I mean, as you know, this has been a decidedly eventful year for those of us who follow Ukraine, and I think everybody here follows Ukraine. It's become something in the nature of a tradition, or a tradition in the making, for the Shevchenko Society to begin its academic year with one of these round tables. I believe this is the third, possibly the fourth such annual event. And it's an opportunity to assess, possibly predict, argue a bit, and in any case get a sense of where things are moving. My guess is that when we last held this event in September of last year, few of us expected this, whatever this is. In any case, to help us understand what this is, and where Ukraine is, and where it might be going, we've assembled this distinguished panel. Ви всі знаєте, хто це є. I'm not going to present or introduce these people to you. So, the order will be Professor Kучинський, Professor Вушко, and Professor Гарвардський. Thank you very much.
Я думаю, що сьогодні ми можемо впевнено стверджувати, що в Україні революція відбулася. Лютнева, як її називають деякі експерти. Було повалено кримінальний режим Януковича, сформовано новий уряд, обрано законного президента, невдовзі парламентські вибори. На події в Україні Росія відповіла агресією, військовою окупацією та анексією значної території суверенної території України. Під приводом захисту співвітчизників та російськомовного населення російські війська захопили Крим та розгорнули широкомасштабну інтервенцію на сході України. Попри всі виправдовування з боку Путіна, на кшталт Росія повернула собі Крим і виправила історичну кривду, та народ Криму має право на самовизначення, і терпець Москви щодо дій Заходу вичерпався, факт агресії залишається. Дії Росії – грубе порушення міжнародних норм, статуту ООН та ОБСЄ, українсько-російських домовленостей та Будапештського меморандуму 1994 року про надання гарантій безпеки України. Своїми діями Путін не тільки підірвав систему колективної безпеки у післявоєнній Європі, але й кинув фактично виклик усій західній цивілізації. У телефонній розмові з Барозо, президентом Єврокомісії, минулого місяця Путін похвалявся: «Я можу взяти Київ за 2 тижні». Ще одне висловлювання Путіна стало відомо кілька днів тому. Я цитую: «Якби я хотів, то вів би війська протягом 2 днів не лише в Київ, але й в Ригу, Вільнюс, Таллін, Варшаву і Бухарест». Це вже прямий виклик Північно-Атлантичному альянсу. Адже всі зазначені країни є членами НАТО, і їхня безпека гарантується статутом НАТО. Яка головна мета Путіна на сучасному етапі? Довічне утримання ним особистої влади. Це головна мета. А для цього йому потрібен зовнішній ворог та переможні війни.
I believe that, especially in times like this, all of us make our choices, and all of us make choices basically day to day. And I cannot really emphasize enough how each of us is responsible for what we do and for what we don't do, for what we say and for what we don't say. And that's of course partly a reflection on what is going on again, exactly, specifically in New York, and I'm not going to sort of to point fingers, right, what's going on, but I think there is, and unfortunately, there are a related issue which I would like to raise is of institutional responsibility, right, and that is related to individual responsibility. We have a range of institutions, you know, I'm very happy to be here, I'm very glad, I'm very thankful for the opportunity to speak here in front of you, and I hope that this is not my last time, given to what I'm going to say now. but there are enough institutions that have Ukrainian in their titles, right? Ukrainian studies, XYZ, right? And all of us in various ways are engaged. The very fact that you are present here actually implies that you participate in those institutions, right? Now, I would say, first of all, that the issue of language, right? I think that, the reason why I mentioned where I grew up, I'm a Ukrainian speaker. I'm a late child. Both of my parents were technically born in Poland. I grew up speaking totally Ukrainian. My parents would have killed me if I ever spoke Russian at home. That said, I think at this specific situation, right, in 2014, there are issues that are more important than language, right? And I think that there are some of the institutions in this country just become way too much concerned about saving a language, right? And that question I'm asking myself, what is actually more important? Is it the time to, as a human, what is more important? Is it a language, any language, right? My language, your language, or human life, right? What is more important? Very important things. I'm confident that they're doing very important things, and I hope, I don't know many of you here, but I hope maybe some of you actually come from those organizations, right? There is no way to know for us what's going on behind those closed doors. And we would very much like to know what's going on behind those closed doors, right? Why the information has been held behind the closed doors? Why there is no discussion? Why people who are younger, who are the fourth generation like myself, but who've spent enough time in this country and who become involved in things Ukrainian in the diaspora life, involuntarily, so to speak, why wouldn't we have access to that, open some sort of discussion?
Well, when this topic was being formulated, there was a war going on, and it was normal to put it in terms of war and peace. Now we seem to have peace, but obviously the war is still going on in other means, in other ways. So, can I tell you, if you have been following the internet as assiduously as I have been, you probably know everything, right? Everything that is to know. So I guess the task that we have is to think of, connections and relations and issues that might not be readily apparent. And let me try to do that in a preliminary way. Well, what are the pluses for Ukraine? All right. Well, first of all, as you probably know, Ukraine was wrapped up with a bow on top and ready to be delivered to Putin before November 2013, and even as late as December or January of this year, because its entire structure, especially its military structure and its various so-called siloviki, or services that deal with power, were controlled by Russian agents, indeed Russian citizens. The country and its administrative and military structures was ready to be delivered. And then suddenly this revolution happened, and the whole country can't be delivered anymore. And George Soros, a very level-headed and sober person, wrote in the New York Review of Books in March, I think it was, with a kind of awe about the fact that Ukrainians just decided to fight with wooden shields and sticks in their arms, in their hands, against people firing, high penetration bullets that go through armor, let alone through bodies. So a very heroic thing. And I say this not with any kind of, skepticism or irony. I mean, a genuinely heroic development. So, in a sense, the country was saved. Although immediately afterwards, as soon as the Sochi Games were over, Putin took Crimea. Not only did he take it, but the Ukrainian strategic decision was not to fight him, because they were afraid that the same scenario would happen in Ukraine as in Georgia in 2008, that the pretext of fighting would mean that the Russians could unleash all their army, which is obviously much stronger, much bigger, much better capable, and staffed and armed, as opposed to the Ukrainian army, which was being degraded over the last 23 years. To the extent that it was hard to man battalions that would actually work and fight. But there are more fundamental and I think problematic things going on. Not only the collective psychological threat and trauma that is going on, but the loss of, de facto loss of sovereignty in various ways. Because the fact that Russia is insisting on various conditions that the EU and the US is also in a certain way agreeing to means that Ukraine is not really being treated as a sovereign country, but as a country to which, or with which, to any kind of a meeting, also, the EU comes, or now the US would come, which presumably would support it, but it doesn't appear as a full-standing sovereign player, but with a kind of, if you will, older brother, just as with North Korea and South Korea, with China supporting North Korea and the US, South Korea, and so on. Even worse, there are various initiatives going on in which things Ukrainian are being discussed without Ukrainians there. The consolidation in Ukraine is not as real as we might think. We hope that it is, but unfortunately, especially when I talk with people from over there, people I know and trust and know that are knowledgeable and are not just responding to the emotions of the battlefield and events that are coming from there, many of which are fake, as you know, alas, is that certainly as far as the example of the parliamentary elections that are already in full sway, is that some things are unfortunately not as they ought to be, or not as good as they ought to be. Reforms have not been instituted. For all the talk about reforms, they are not being instituted yet. And the country is throat deep in corruption, if not all the way over the top of the head. And the various electoral lists that are being drawn up are being made in the spirit of eyewash. Batьківщина has Nadia Savchuk as its first candidate, and Petro Poroshenko's party has Mustafa Nayem and Oleg, is that his first name, or Ihor Shevchenko, various journalists whom supposedly people know and trust. But further down the list, a same bunch or a similar crew of oligarchs and corruptionere are still on these lists. So, we will have to see the nature of the pudding and the eating of it. And one is not sure of how it will look. Ukraine has not had reform in scholarship since independence. And there are no prospects, as far as I can tell, that the new regime, the Poroshenko regime, which I very much support and wish it the best of luck, is prepared to think of this, which for our setting, for this institution where in which we are talking about these problems is central, that this regime is interested in reforming it. As always, other things are paramount. The war. Well, clearly that takes precedence, because if the Russians occupy Ukraine, then what kind of scholarship are you going to see, especially what we've seen in Donetsk and Luhansk, where these gangsters and terrorists have kidnapped Ukrainian rectors and professors and thrown out Ukrainian, books because they don't want to have any of it. So obviously that takes precedence. But what I'm saying is that, yes, we're finished. So the situation is mixed. However, having said all of that, I still think that the prospects and the potential that has been unleashed is phenomenal. And it's our task to make sure that it is continued and developed in the way that is most conducive for its for success and for development. Thank you.
I'd like to start with the proposition. Finally, for the first time in 23 years, it has an elite, a political elite, that is for the most part almost, well, I would say unanimously committed to a pro-Western course and a pro-European course and a pro-democratic course. It's committed to reform. It has a population that for the first time in 23 years, by and large, considers itself Ukrainian and is dedicated in some fashion or other to this country, regardless of language and other differences. Those have not been as important as they have been in the past. It has a population that is expecting and is desirous and is demanding reforms, and by that they mean radical reforms. This was never the case in the past. This is for the first time in 23 years that Ukraine is committed that Ukraine actually enjoys the support of major Western and global institutions as well as countries. That was never the case in the past. And this is also the first time in 23 years that reform is not just desirable in the sense that if you don't do it, then things in the economy won't grow. Reform is the condition sine qua non. It is absolutely necessary for Ukraine not just to thrive and prosper, but to survive. And people understand that. I would submit to you that Ukraine today resembles very closely Poland in 1990. It is consolidated, the elite is consolidated, it is moving westward, it has the support of the West, and it has a vision of reform. Then there's the Russian factor. That Putin is some kind of genius, that Russia is strong. Yes, of course it's strong, but it's been weakened enormously. If you look at Russia's position today compared to where it was a year ago, it's become significantly worse. Putin was the darling of the West. He was the darling of Europe. He was the darling of the world. He's managed in a brief 6 months to transform Russia, which was an integrated global player, into a rogue state. He's managed to transform himself from an individual who was considered to be mildly authoritarian into Putler. He's managed to impose on Russia some of the worst sanctions that can happen to any country. And last but not least, he's transformed Ukraine from a quasi-ally that was becoming a vassal state into a country that detests him and his regime. I don't think the balance is actually that bad. Але, продовжимо. Я маю два запитання до кожного доповідача і проситиму вас відповісти на них. In other words, 2 questions to each of the speakers. Please give me an answer. And you are the judges of whether they actually answer. Next year, when we hold this panel, where do you expect Ukraine to be? No wishy-washy answers. Скажіть, будь ласка, якою буде Україна? Буде чи не буде? А як буде, то якою? Це питання номер 1. Друге питання. Second question. Forget that we're at the Shevchenko Scientific Society. We're here at the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine. Poroshenko is sitting where Dr. Protsik is sitting. He's given each of you exactly 30 seconds, as is indeed the practice in such policy circles, to propose one concrete policy for Ukraine today.
So I would advise to press hard on our Western allies to really assist Ukraine not only with, wishes and blankets, but with weapons, and do everything so that Ukraine could fight the aggressor. As to the first question, of course Ukraine will be celebrating in a year's time, as you were very optimistic at what's going on now, so we'll be celebrating our victory, I hope.
Of course, I can say here, yes, that it's going to be Ukraine. Would be, of course, to start cleaning the ranks in all kind of ranks. I think.
I really like these questions. The first one, very quickly, yes, I think it'll be there. I don't think it'll be as good as we want it to be, but it won't be as bad. We might lose some more territory. I will repeat things that I've said before. First of all, I think he should fire a lot of people, an awful lot of people. In some in some areas, fire them all. Like in the academic. Fire all the people in the Academy of Sciences who are in the administration. Fire them all. That's what the Germans did. I mean, the West Germans. So, I mean, I'm not saying you can do that with everything. You can't do that with the foreign service because it doesn't require maybe that cleaning, because it's corrupt. There is endemic, deep, widespread, massive corruption. That's one thing. The other thing is hire the Varangians, because if you don't, then the Russian propaganda will simply eat you up. It's already doing that, or was doing it until recently.